no mystery. But to say that without God we wouldn't know, and that without God any evil we did would be thinkable, is the precise reverse of the case. I put it to you, ladies and gentlemen, brothers, sisters. Is it not rather the case that with God everything is permissible? That once a primate believes he has God on his side, that primate is capable of anything. The suicide bombing community, more or less 100% religious. The genital mutilation community, practically 100% religious. The injunctions and warrants in the Bible, in the text itself, for slavery, for genocide, inescapably right there, and acted upon, and in the name of God, by primates who thought they had God on their side. It is when people think they are God's appointed or anointed that any kind of wickedness is possible. Let me ask you, rephrase it and ask you the question in reverse. Can you, sir, or can anyone here, name a moral or ethical action or statement that could be made by a believer, a moral or ethical statement or action, made or taken, uttered, that couldn't be made or uttered or taken by me as a non-believer? You have to think quickly. No, you don't. You've got all night. I'll give you my email. There's a prize for anyone who can name me the moral action I can't commit that a believer can. Now, I've never had an answer yet. I don't expect to. But if I asked you, think of a wicked action you've heard of that could only have been committed by someone who believed they had God on their side, you've already thought of it. You don't have to hesitate. You just have to think of the last suicide bomber, the last genital mutilation, the last jihad, the last crusade, the last alliance between the Vatican and fascism, anything you like, and it's done. So it's an insult to be told that without superstition and without the supernatural, we wouldn't know how to treat one another well, we wouldn't know the difference between right and wrong, we couldn't perform a right action or utter ethical remarks. It's a degrading insult. It makes us serfs. It makes us slaves. It makes us people dependent upon a celestial dictatorship that cannot be altered, that watches us while we sleep, whose verdicts cannot be challenged, who can convict us of thought crime. In my judgment, the emancipation of humanity, which has taken a very great deal of time, just as the expansion of our life expectancy had to be worked on very hard. When it was left just to God to decide these things, we didn't live very long, couldn't cure any diseases, and didn't know that our planet wasn't the center of the universe. But once this emancipation has begun, I think it's unstoppable. And the emancipation of humanity begins when you throw off the idea that you live in a celestial North Korea and that only a dictator can give you permission to think or behave well or act morally. Thank you. Thank you.
We will now turn to the question and answer session for the speakers between themselves. Each speaker, starting with Dr. Turek, will have the opportunity of asking two brief questions of their opponent, who will then give brief replies. Thank you.
Sorry. I suppose if I can't be erect, I can at least be upright. I wasn't ready, in other words.
Christopher.
Sir.
I gave evidence the universe had a beginning, and it did so with great precision. I'd like to ask you a question that I think Leibniz brought up many years ago. If there is no God, why does anything exist?
We both have this Navy background.
Yes, sir.
In Portsmouth, where I'm from, there's an old story about a young man taking his captain's examination before a board of admirals. And they say to him, right, your ship is on a lee shore, it's being driven by whatever wind towards the rocks. What are you going to do to get out of this terrible position? He says, I would I would pile on an extra sail and pull the stern hard to starboard, and hope by this means to escape to save the ship. And they said, well, going very well, but there's the wind is still blowing, the gale is coming at you still, and the rocks are getting nearer. Now what are you going to do? So I put on more sail and keep the helm hard down to starboard and maintain this position. But yes, but the wind is still blowing you, and the gale force has increased, and the rocks are getting near. Now what are you going to do? And he said, well, I'd cram on extra sail and keep the helm hard down to starboard. One of the admirals, with rather red-faced exasperation at this point, says, where are you getting all this extra sail from? And the young captain says, well, the same place you're getting all that extra wind from. Now, either a priori you believe in a creation story, or you do not. I am, I'll just have to say it, I'm one of those people who's meant by Pascal when he says he's writing his pensée to those who are so made that they cannot believe. You have to include me in that. I don't believe in a creator. I don't believe I'm supervised. I don't believe that a being set the universe in motion. And I don't know.
Then how is it set in motion?
And I don't know any physicist who does, and I'm not a physicist
I quoted
myself,
a lot of
but
them
I'm
already.
saying, if you and I had been having this argument in the 18th century, you'd be saying that I should recognize Jesus as my personal savior, and you wouldn't have heard of the Big Bang.
I would have heard of...
And you don't convince me...
What does that have to do with the question?
I'll just have to say this. You don't convince me that there's any connection between your faith and any scientific observation.
There's a difference between proof and persuasion.
I'm not here to debate physics, and I'm not competent to do so.
Okay, so you don't have an answer for that, how the universe came into existence out of nothing.
No more than you do, no.
Let's move to the second question.
If all space, all matter, and all time had a beginning, the cause must be outside of space, matter, and time.
You don't know how it happened, neither do I. Okay?
Well, now this is important, Dr. Taylor, because in his book, Christopher Hitchens on page 70 says that he knows that this happened without God. That's what you said. It works without God. So how does it work without God?
No, I'm sorry, I think you must be quoting my quotation from Laplace.
No,
am I not correct?
No. Page 70.
Laplace says it works without that assumption, yes.
Here's what you say. You say, however, and critically, we can now do this while dropping, or even if you insist, retaining the idea of God, but in either case, the theory works without that assumption. So how does it work without that assumption?
I'm repeating, first, as you'll notice, I say you can retain the idea if you like. It has no explanatory value. But it works without the assumption as well as it works with it.
How does it work without?
And I'm referring back to what the great astronomer and physicist Laplace said when asked by the emperor, when he'd shown him his working model of the universe, and the emperor said, well, there doesn't seem to be a God in this.
Laplace was centuries ago, Christopher. We've advanced in physics since then. We know other things.
Laplace said, Your Majesty, it works without that assumption. I'm simply re-quoting him, and I'm saying, and you can retain the idea if you like. You're not going to convince me, and I don't think you've convinced anyone in the audience, that you know very much more about the origins of the universe than they did.
It's an implication.
And that would be true even if you knew more about it than I do, which you may well.
Mr. Hitchens, would you like to ask a question of Dr. Turek?
Yes, I'd like to ask him what kind of Christian he is, and who are and who are not Christians, in his view, who claim to be.
I'm a non-denominational Christian. I believe that anyone who believes that Jesus died and rose again for their sins is a Christian.
As simple as that. So it doesn't matter to you whether someone's a Catholic or a Mormon,